secret relationship that perhaps is not so secret anymore. Tom Joslin is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and senior editor of the Long War Journal. It's nice to have you back on the show, Tom. These are the documents, the bin Laden documents that were released in court this week. Forgive the notes and the post-its on it, but I've been looking through it pretty carefully, and I just want to work through with you what they say so our viewers can really understand how specific the letters are. Just to start off, in this one section about Iran, there's references to external work, that al-Qaeda is doing external work, and the first reference is in Iran. Why is that?
Well, external work or external operations are their attacks basically in the West or elsewhere around the world. Al-Qaeda is organized into various regions, and there are regional emirs who are in charge of certain countries. On top of that, there's a layer of Al-Qaeda that's in charge of basically spectacular terrorist attacks against American interests, Western interests, both in the West and elsewhere.
So there's an individual named here that I'm not familiar with that we'll get to in a moment. And they talk about him being in Iran. He has 6 to 8 brothers to choose from. It goes on to say in the letter, his plan is to stay around 3 months in Iran, to train the brothers there, then start moving them and distributing them in the world for their missions and specialties.
This is Sheikh Yunus al-Maritani. He was a top al-Qaeda operative who was charged with planning spectacular terrorist attacks. And in fact, he was in charge of planning an attack in 2010 that was thwarted by European intelligence officials that wanted to replicate Mumbai-style attacks in several European cities. And his operatives were moving through Iran, as we reported previously, over and over again, and actually received safe haven in Iran after the plot was thwarted.
Let's talk about that safe haven, because al-Qaeda presumably can use a lot of different countries as a safe haven that could be sympathetic to them. Why Iran? Why is Iran being used?
Well, Iran is safe for them in some ways because in Pakistan, the Americans have an intelligence presence. Parts of the Pakistani establishment cooperate with us, other parts don't. But in Iran, this was seen as, under this deal, as a safe way for them to move operatives back and forth to Europe and elsewhere.
There's those that say, though, wait a minute, Iran is Shia, al-Qaeda is Sunni, they don't get along, so there's no merit in this. To that, what do you say?
Well, Iran and al-Qaeda have the common enemies. They have a lot of common enemies, including us. And there's definitely points of tension between them. There have been antagonistic episodes between them. There's areas where they don't cooperate. In fact, they're at each other's throats in Syria and Yemen and elsewhere. But despite all of that, they still have a deal, and that deal allows them to cooperate against us and against the West.
It was interesting in reading through these letters that these are letters informing bin Laden of activity, but almost asking permission. Talk to us about that part and what this shows us about his role in these operations.
Well, in the passage you highlighted there, what does it say? It says that Yunus is waiting for bin Laden's permission. They're waiting for him to make a decision.
Right. We are waiting from you the last confirmation, if possible.
Yeah, and as you've noted throughout the files there with your stickies and everything, bin Laden is making a lot of decisions. He's, in fact, very much in the game at the time of his death. He's still a manager of this international network. This directly contradicts a narrative the White House put out that said that he was a line winner or in retirement or someone who had been sidelined. In fact, bin Laden was still making managerial decisions on a regular basis.
Okay, so bin Laden is now dead. There's a question moving forward about al-Qaeda, what it looks like now, but also our relationship with Iran. So let's bring the story full circle, because these Iranian nuclear negotiations are happening right now. What do you think these papers illuminate about the negotiations that we should consider?
Well, I think Iran still allows certain al-Qaeda operatives to use their soil as a staging ground for attacks and for operations. In fact, President Obama's own Treasury and State Departments have routinely recognized that since July 28, 2011. So even as they're opposed to each other in certain ways, and even as the U.S. is trying to bring Iran into the sort of world community, Iran still has this deal with al-Qaeda. And that says a lot about, I think, the underlying assumption behind the negotiations, which is that President Obama thinks that he can have détente or an alliance with Iran against our common enemies. The answer to that is no. Iran has an alliance with their common friends against us.
A lot to think about there. Tom, great to have you in the program.
Thanks, Jen.
As always.